My main purpose is to share my life, the story of the Holocaust, so something like this can never happen again. My mother died February the 27th, 1939. I was 9 months old. My father didn't know what to do with me, so he moved out of the house, and my aunt and uncle moved in to take care of me. And as I grew up, I thought that Yata was my mother. My father was in the textile business. He was a very highly educated man. He spoke 6, 7 different languages. One evening there was a knock on the door, and I was told to go to my room. And then walks this man in a green uniform, black boots, and then my father and the officer go to another room. My father opens up a drawer and takes a handful of little papers out. And as you open up the papers, little stones were falling out. So my father was paying off the Germans so we could. I used to wait for my father to come back from work, and used to cross this wooden bridge that took you from one side of the ghetto to the other. And I always used to meet him downstairs and say to him, "Tata, what did you bring to eat today?" And he always had something. And after our main meal, our evening meal, I had to be hidden because the Nazis would come through. They were looking for old people and young people. Old were useless and young were useless. So I jumped into the bed with my mother, and she told me not to move, just lay still. Or sometimes they put me into a closet. I was allowed to go downstairs during the day, and the first thing that I would see would be dead people. These are the people that died the night before. And usually a wagon pulled by 2 men would come and pick up the dead bodies. And I would run to the fence because I was attracted to the German soldiers. And my mother would call from the window, "Snatek, Natek," stay away from the fence, because she was afraid that something might happen. My father came home early one day, and he said to pack as much as we could pack. And we crossed that wooden bridge, and one of the buildings we walked in, all the workers were gone. We climbed to the very top, and he opened up a trap door, and the attic became my new home. But during the daytime, I heard people yelling and screaming. Trucks would pull up in front of this other building, and then Germans were rounding up the people. And if they ran away, they would shoot them. I went with my father, and we started living in deserted buildings. During the daytime, he would put me in a corner of the building and cover me up with bricks and wood, and told me not to move and wait until he came back. And he usually came back with something to eat. But one morning, as we were waking up, the German soldiers were coming through the buildings looking for stragglers. So they pointed their rifles at us. They took us, put us into a truck, and took us to the train station. As we pulled into the train station, they told us to get off the truck. And I saw my mother, my 2 uncles, so we went over there. And there were a lot of people there. The Germans were walking around with dogs. And if somebody said something or did something, they would start hitting them with a whip. And eventually the train started pulling in. They piled us into the cattle cars. There was no place to sit. You just had to stand. How many people, I have no idea, but it was horrible. The odor, the smell from the people just being so close. For toilet purposes, they gave us a bucket. And eventually, the bucket started overflowing. So you had the feces and urine all over the place. And my family would take turns at holding me. I went from my uncle to Bernard, to my uncle David, and to my father as the train proceeded on. They had no idea where it was going. The coppers were screaming and yelling at us, "Schnell, schnell, alle Leute raus," means everybody out. Then they took us to our sleeping area, and they took roll call after roll call. And there was such a horrible smell in the place. It's a smell that I have never forgotten. At that time, we didn't know what it was, and I didn't know until after the war, but it was the crematorium. We were assigned sleeping quarters, and my mother saw rats running around, so she said to take the top bunk. And so they gave us nothing to eat, nothing to drink. And the top bunk was, my mattress was straw. It smelled of urine, and it was loaded with lice and fleas. And over a period of time, the lice embedded themselves underneath my skin. But I cuddled up to my mother, and we fell asleep. Early in the morning, it was still dark. They woke us up, and we went outside for roll call. Roll call after roll call. They gave us a cup of coffee, and the women went to work, and the kids were left. What I did, I really don't remember. Most likely, I was looking for something to eat, and there was nothing to eat. I was so hungry, and there was no food to eat. I mean, if I saw a leaf or anything, I would eat it. Anything that was edible, I would eat it. Our main meal was noon. We got soup. The soup was made out of all the garbage that the Germans didn't want. We would beg the cook to give us a potato. And sometimes you got a good one, sometimes it was rotten. And they would never hand it to you. They would throw it on the dirty floor. There was no place to wash it. You would just eat it. Because when you're hungry, you'll eat anything that's put in front of you. Every day I would think about food, every minute, and thinking, where am I going to get my next meal? Right. When we all went to sleep, everybody would go to sleep. I would watch where they hid the little pieces of bread. And in the middle of the night, I would climb down from my bunk and steal the bread. Every morning we had a roll call, and this one particular morning, they took my aunt. I had no idea where she was going, and I found out after the war that they took her for experiments. I never saw her again. My mother and me were standing at a roll call one morning when a German came up to my mother and took her, and I wasn't crying, but I was just saying, "Mama, Mama, Mama." And the German looked at me, and he let my mother go. But this one particular day, we had a mass roll call. Men and women and children were together, and I was standing next to my father when a German officer with a little stick was walking by and tapping children. So they took us to the trucks, and I moved forward to the truck as they piled in more children. And as the trucks were going down the road, I had that fresh air hit my face. We arrived in Sachsenhausen, and we went through the main gate. The truck stopped, and they told us to get off, and they marched us around to the back and told us to stand still. The next morning, I woke up and there was no food, so I went out looking for food. I was hungry. And when I came back to the barracks, it was empty. All the children were gone. Two men walked in and they started pulling up the floorboards. And they saw me sitting there, so they took me along. These men were digging up underneath the barracks for quite some time. They couldn't do it in their barracks because there were other men, but the children's barracks were empty. So they took me underneath the barracks. We couldn't sit. I lay there from the 17th of April till the 22nd of April. No food, nothing to eat, nothing to drink. Well, we heard people yelling and screaming, "We're free, we're free." We came out of hiding and we were liberated by the 3rd Russian Army. So the Russians were handing out food and I grabbed as much as I could and I started eating as fast as I could. I was so hungry. And I had these horrible pains in my stomach. That's all I remember. My uncles were liberated by the Russians also on April the 30th. That was 8 days after my liberation. And they told the commandant that the nephew was in Sachsenhausen. So they gave a truck with a driver and my uncles came looking for me. They couldn't find me anywhere. They went through all the barracks and they wanted to know what happened to Stephen, not them. So they started going through the piles of dead bodies. And I was found April the 30th, 1945. I was barely alive. I was a skeleton. I'm the last survivor of not only my family, but also of all the people that I knew and did business with and associated with. As I look back, I'm one of the luckiest people alive. I think my story should be told because a lot of people to this day still don't believe the Holocaust existed. So I hope that my message is something that would help people understand what the Holocaust was all about.